What up, nerds? My name is Leslie, and welcome to The Nerdy Narrative. On this channel, I like to share with you my thoughts about all of the things that I'm reading. And I read a lot of different things, many different genres. Science fiction, fantasy, horror, picture books. That's what I call manga and comics. Classics, literary fiction, nonfiction, short stories, poetry. There's really not much I won't stick my nose into and give a try. So today is Friday, and that means today's episode of fun is going to be about what I read, what I'm reading, and what I plan to read next. Before we get into all that, there's something I want to go ahead and get on your radar. April 24th on the channel Dark Between Pages, Nikki is hosting a live stream with a few of us booktubers and the author Daniel Barnett. If you have been around this channel any length of time, you have heard that name many times over. He is the author of the Nightmare Land Chronicles. That is a series that I have been reading since the first book came out. There are currently 4 books out in that series. The 5th one is on the way. I do have the arc for the City of Blood, but I have not finished it yet. Hands down, this is my favorite post-apocalyptic horror series going right now. So I am very excited for this live stream. I hope you guys will check it out and come. I also got some book mail I wanted to show you guys this week. I got An Unkindness of Magicians by Kat Howard. This book has been on my TBR for over a year. Well over a year. I have been so interested in reading this book. I haven't heard a whole lot of mention about it on BookTube, but when I posted it on my Instagram stories, so many people sent me messages about it. There was only one person who had actually read it. Everybody else was like, hey, I'm kind of interested in that book. I can't wait to hear what you think. And then my friend Penny messaged me and she's like, hey, I'll read that with you. And I'm like, when do you want to do this? She's like, how about next month? I'm like, done. But this little surprise is a gift to me from my friend Kelly from Kelly Hooked on Books. I'm going to have her linked below. She's one of my friends from the horror community, and she sent me a fantasy book, which was really funny, and she said she did it solely based off the cover, which I got a huge kick out of. But I wanted to show you guys something. So if you look at it carefully, see if the camera will focus on it. See how the covers are kind of poking up and fluffed up? And you guys know I keep my books in pristine condition. I'm very careful with them. But the reason why this cover is in this condition is because I haven't been able to stop smelling this book. Like, I told Kelly I couldn't even send her a thank you for about 30 minutes because I was just obsessively sniffing this book because it smells delicious. Let's get into what I read last week. Let's start with my picture books. I am currently buddy reading the comic series by John Layman and Rob Guillory with Una from the Codex Cantina. Chew is just amazing. This series has been so fun. It's so full of humor, but it is also rather dark. I completed volumes 6, 7, and 8, which puts me roughly about 75% of the way through the series. So there's not much I can tell you about it that wouldn't spoil it for you if you haven't read the series, except I'm loving it. I am especially taking pleasure in something that happened to a certain character that Una loves that I don't, and poor guy. Suffice it to say, I am having a lot of fun reading this series. And the next book that I completed is The Dark That Dwells by Matt Digman and Ryan Roddy. I told you guys last week that I wanted to finish either this one or The Mask of Mirrors over the weekend, and you can see which one won. This book, I ended up binging out the last 160, 70 pages in a day. With 160, 70 pages left to go, at that point, I felt that I had a grasp on all of the plot lines and where I thought they would end. There are plans to have 5 books in this series, so I did realize that there were going to be some things that would be carried over, obviously, for book 2 to continue. But I thought I had a grasp on where this would end, and I was wrong. It just got even more epic at the end. If book 2 had already been published by these two, I would have immediately ordered it, primed that sucker for the next day, because like it leaves you wanting more, but it leaves you in a satisfactory place. Like, I'm okay with where it ended and having to wait for book 2, except that I really want book 2. There are so many awesome things that these two authors crafted in this book, but these two really outdid themselves on also making their own influences. Like, I would not be surprised if in the next 10-15 years we have an author write a book that were influenced by what these two authors have crafted in this galaxy or galaxies. And then my final completed read of the week is the novella Breach of Peace by Daniel Green. I decided to pick this one up on Audible because it had Matt and Kate, who also do the Stormlight Archives, which I actually have never listened to Stormlight, so I wasn't thrown off by them doing these character voices. So for me, that didn't happen. I did enjoy them as audiobook narrators, so I'm definitely gonna listen to more of their stuff. I liked it. Did I think it was the best thing I ever read? No. Did I expect Daniel Green's first piece of published work to be the best thing he had ever written? No. Did I like it? Did I think it lived up to a debut? I sure did. I believe he meant for this to be a fantasy work. I read a ton of horror. There is nothing fantasy about this novella at all. Unless I missed it, there was no magic. Like, there was nothing about this that said fantasy to me. There was everything about it that said horror. Do I care? No, I love horror. So it was right up my alley. So I can see where that did kind of throw people off who are fantasy readers and they were expecting a fantasy novella and got this. So I understand why that threw them off. But for me, it checked all the boxes that I like in horror. Started out with a very scary, graphic, bloody scene. Violence. Horror. That's something I love in horror. I want to start out with something that's going to suck me in. He accomplished that. We don't really meet the bad guy until closer to the end. The bad guy to me seemed like a demon. That screams horror. And then the third thing that is random, but I promise you it usually shows up in every single horror novel I've ever read, and a lot of times it is one time that it's mentioned. It's random, it adds nothing to the narrative whatsoever, like has 0 point. A guy has a random erection and it's like, why? That is the dumbest thing, and it pulls me out of every horror book I've ever read because it is so random. It's just thrown in, and it's like, is that just some unwritten rule under writing horror? Is some guy has to have a random erection? It's like, why would the author draw attention to that? It's so stupid. It is not required. At any rate, I digress. So this book checked all of the boxes for horror and none for fantasy. The only small thing that I can think of that had a flavor of fantasy was Clyd's name, which is the dumbest name I've ever heard of. That was so dumb, especially when you're listening to it on audiobook. Because in audiobook, it did not sound like Clyd. I'm sorry to all of you that I just ruined the audiobook for, because now you're gonna hear it the way that I did. Okay, more about Breach of Peace. I really liked his prose. You know, I just found it easy to understand and just flow with it. I know this is completely random, but I really appreciated certain word choices that he made. Some of the choices that he made just really fit well in the situation they were in. He didn't repeat the same word over and over. And what I mean by that, it's like the investigator walked around the shed. The investigator looked at the ground by the shed. The investigator went inside the doorway of the shed. The investigator looked at the walls lining the inside of the shed. You know, just repeating like the shed over and over. I've read some books where some authors do that and it's kind of a little bit annoying. And he didn't do that, so I really liked that. The last 25% of the novella kind of got a little messy. I don't know if maybe there were some last minute changes made or something to that effect, but it just felt a little messy. I don't know if it's that way because of the events that were happening, because there was some calamity going on. There was a lot of things going on. So it may have been to reflect that. I'm not sure. I just really loved how it started, and I wish that had continued. I am a character-driven reader. There was no depth to any of the characters. I did like the relationship between Clyd and her husband Samuel. I thought he just really illustrated that well. I just really appreciated, and it felt, now I am not in law enforcement. I don't have anybody that's ever been in law enforcement, but it felt authentic. Two law enforcement officers were married. It felt like they had it felt like that would be how it was for two people in love with the same job. Now, I don't think a married couple would be allowed to investigate the same cases together, but that's nitpicking. One thing that absolutely did not sit right with me at all is the ruling deity in this world is called the Almighty, and they say God bless to one another, and it is not the God of the Christians. Like, it is not. This thing seemed to have taken power, and the beings working for it are not nice. Very evil, in fact. And I think Daniel should have named it something else. You know, like Brandon Sanderson had the Stormfather. That pulled me out of the story like nobody's business. Like, at the first part of the book, I didn't realize that it wasn't God that he was talking about. I didn't realize that until about 2/3 of the way in, when one of the characters went into a little more detail about the Almighty. I feel that's going to rub some folks the wrong way and just kind of pull them out of it, because it's hard to take something you have known one way your whole life and give the same name to something else, especially when it's not good. I've seen so much back and forth about Daniel's book that I just had to find out for myself what I thought. And there you have it. Those are my thoughts. So that takes care of everything that I read last week. What I'm still reading. So I'm still currently working on The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick, and I am loving this book. I have a little less than 100 pages to go. I will finish this today. I am very much in love with this book. This sucker is definitely in the running to be one of my top 5 reads of the year. This narrative is so sexy. It will draw you in. I love this book. There is so much mystery, so much intrigue. The politics between the different noble houses, as well as those between the nobles and what they call the lower bank, the peasants, which kind of feel to me like gypsies. I keep getting a very gypsy feel for these people, and it's so intriguing. Just that alone is a fantastic storyline, but that's not all that's going on. You have an epic con that's happening, and it's so clever what this character is doing to ingratiate herself into a noble family. Like, I am living for that alone. And then you have a hero of the people. You have this mysterious figure called the Rook, and he's been around for centuries. Now, it's not the same guy. You know, obviously, it's getting passed generation to generation. But this guy, I keep picturing him, because he's always in black, but I keep picturing kind of like a Zorro character in my head when I read about him. I am not getting enough of the Rook in my life. I love him. He's so dashing and mysterious, and I keep changing who I think he is too. And the one that I was about to die on a hill that it was him, well, let's just say it's definitely not that guy. But man, the society is so interesting. I am loving, like, these two authors made up a completely new society and how it works. Like, I am fascinated. It's like a history lesson that I am enjoying learning about. It's just absolutely, like, that alone is worth reading it for. There's so much about this book, and just the way that the characters treat each other, it's so flirty. Like, just, like, no, it's not smut. Like, there's no smut going on. But for instance, in society, you know, if a noble should bare their hand, take their glove off in public, pretty much equated to them walking around in public naked. There's this scene where a young lady loses her glove to the rook, and I mean, I was blushing. I was eating it up too. So I love this book. It is such a delight. I have absolutely had the best time reading this book. I've been flying through it. This one is an extremely fast read. It is 630 pages, but you will fly through this book. Then the next book that I'm still reading that I started yesterday is The Least of My Scars by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a buddy read with my friend Evie from the channel. She Was Only Evie. I'm glad I'm buddy reading it with somebody, because this sucker is dark. I've only read The Only Good Indians and My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. There's a lot of humor in those. There was a little bit of gore too. That is what I expected in this one. Oh man, no. Very graphic, very gory, very dark. We are in the mind of a serial killer, and he is basically killing without impunity. He is set up to where he's just in an apartment, and the guy, his benefactor, has also leased all the apartments around him, and he just sends people to this guy's apartment, the serial killer, Billy, to kill these people. It's so realistic, the things, like, you're in this guy's mind, and he's just kind of thinking through some things in the past that happened, like as he met with his benefactor, how they first met, and some of the things that he said to describe how it was for him, why he did what he did. And he'll say, you know, it's usually maybe one person that starts it, and what is it about that one person? And so he'll just say, you know, maybe I'm walking down the sidewalk and this girl steps in front of me, and she has black hair and she looks this way and this and that, and then I fixate on her, and maybe that's my one that starts it. I mean, it's very realistic. And I read 2 chapters and I messaged Evie and I said, I'm gonna have to wait for my husband to get home to read any more of this. I've only read about 3 or 4 chapters. I thought I was gonna binge it. I can't handle much of this at a time, so far anyway. And then I also started The Last Argument of Kings, which is book 3 in the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. I'm currently about 3 or 4 chapters in. I'm strictly listening to it on audiobook right now. It's the one that I'm listening to like while I clean, cook, walk the dogs, until I finish Mask of Mirrors. And then I'll start doing some physical reading with it as well. But I don't mind the audiobook on this. I love Stephen Pacey. He is such an amazing narrator. Even when I do read physically, I still hear all of the voices he makes for the characters, but I really do prefer to completely do the immersion reading of listening and reading at the same time, because I just love Stephen Pacey. I'm very early in. We're just getting a lay of the land, like where all of the characters are and where they're about to go to. So everybody's kind of getting into position for what the 3rd installment is going to be like in this series. There is one thing that I've been waiting for this entire trilogy. This is the last book of the trilogy. So what I've been waiting for has to happen in this one. But it's a spoiler, so I don't want to tell you if you haven't read those books. If you have read the books, hit me up in the comments down below or message me on Discord or Twitter and I will tell you what that is. And then Also, of course, I'm still currently reading the Chew comic series. I will finish that by the time I check in with you guys next week, and then I will be filming a review. Also, Una and I will have another blog of the two of us reading that together that we will put up as well. All right, so we've covered what I read and what I'm still reading. That brings us to what I will be reading next. Once I finish The Mask of Mirrors, I'm trying to determine if I want to just binge out Last Argument of Kings, or do I want to break it up with something else. So I will probably go ahead and start Morning Star by Pierce Brown, which is book 3 in the Red Rising series. I'm reading this series with the Library of Alexandria's Discord. I'm very excited to see what this story is going to do next. Golden Sun was calamity. There were so many things happening with that one, and the ending was just killer. I mean, that ending was amazing. So I'm very excited to start this one and see what's going to happen next. And then if you'll remember last week I mentioned I wanted to start The City of Blood, which is Nightmare Land Chronicles Volume 5 by Daniel Barnett. I didn't start that one because Evie messaged me that she had finished her book and we wanted to start our buddy read. So once I finish The Least of My Scars, if I'm able to crank it out over the next few days, I am going to go ahead and get started on that arc. It'd be really cool if I could get that one finished up before the live stream with Daniel. April 24th, guys, don't forget, on Nikki's channel, Dark Between Pages. Again, I'll have that in the description box down below. And guys, that is a wrap. That takes care of everything that I got into reading wise last week. I have had some really fun things to read. I really had a great week of reading. I was able to do a ton of reading last week. In fact, I read so much that there were times that I had trouble reconnecting to reality because I spent so much time in all of these different worlds. There were like 3 days that I probably spent 6 to 7 hours reading. And whenever I read like in a long period of time like that, it just is really hard for me to reconnect to reality. So yeah, good times. How about you guys? Did you read anything exciting last week you want to share with me in the comments down below? You know what to do. All right, guys, y'all have a great rest of your day. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. I'll see you soon.